Introducing the right-wing war on education, starring Betsy DeVos, evangelical Christians, and a few dudes who rented out strip malls, called themselves schools, and stole your public school tax dollars.
And on the third day, God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals. Amen.
In this hour, we'll talk about how Republicans want to dumb our kids down and what we have to do to stop them. As always, leading the conversation is Patti Vasquez. But with her, we have Kirk Bangstad of the Inaugural Brewing Company, who is leading the charge to get rid of the parasitic voucher school system in Wisconsin. And a few fellow public education warriors he brought along to educate us. The right-wing war on education is brought to you by the Inaugural Brewing Company. Take it away, Patti.
And this is sponsored by Inaugural Brewing Company. In this hour, we're going to talk about how Republicans want to dumb our kids down and what we have to do to stop them. And I'll be leading the conversation. But with me is Kirk Bangstad of Inaugural Brewing Company, who is leading the charge to get rid of the parasitic voucher school system in Wisconsin, and a few fellow public education warriors he's brought along to educate us. Kirk, hello. I'm so excited to launch this wonderful adventure with you. Take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Patti. I talked to you probably in July or June about this. This has been a long project for me. Basically, ever since Janet Protasiewicz was elected on April 4th this year, which is the fourth progressively leaning Supreme Court justice in Wisconsin, that was a huge deal for the Inaugural Brewing Company Super PAC. We really spent a lot of time focusing on that, because to me that meant that we were protecting Wisconsin's democracy, which means we're protecting America's democracy, because Wisconsin is such a big swing state. And so as soon as that election was over and we had achieved that goal, I thought about what to do next. Basically, the Super PAC was originated because we almost lost our country after the January 6th insurrection. And once we secured democracy, in my own mind, I'm like, what do I do? And so to me, the most important things in Wisconsin right now, first of all, it was getting reproductive rights back for women. We lost them when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And just today, by the way, Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin said they will start giving abortions again. That's a huge thing. Probably because they know that we're suing. The Attorney General is suing in Wisconsin to get those rights back. Secondly, though, was gerrymandering. We are the most gerrymandered state in America, and as soon as I know, I've been in politics now enough to know that this group called Law Forward, who are great progressive lawyers, we're going to take that project on, and so the next thing that I thought about in terms of what was the Wisconsin that I grew up in, that I loved, and what's falling apart. There's a lot of things that have been falling apart since the 80s when I grew up, and the biggest thing is our public schools. Our public schools used to be so we punched way above our belt in our public school system. We weren't very rich of a state. But our public schools were just, top 5 in the country or something like that. And so I said, let's focus on doing that. And so the first call I made was to the woman. We're on a Zoom right now. So the woman to my right, I have no idea what that is on the rest of the Brady Bunch Zoom things. The woman to my right was the first call I made. And she's Professor Julie Underwood, who is a professor emerita for UW-Madison. She was the dean of the School of Public Education, and she's an education lawyer. And she's been fighting for kids and for public schools for most of her career. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to ask Julie, can you were the first call I made. You told me, Kirk, focus on voucher schools. Can I hand the mic over to you and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yes.
And then tell me why you told me to focus on voucher schools.
Okay, well, let me start clarifying one thing. You said that I have been dealing with public education for most of my career. The record stand that I've been dealing with public education all of my career. It is what I do. It is also who I am. And, you also said that that you've been at this for a long time, that you pushed against, for 6 months. Kirk, I've been doing it for 33 years. I've been pushing against vouchers in the state of Wisconsin for 33 years. So this is, of course, it's something that I wanted you to take on. If we're in a position to actually have a state Supreme Court that will listen to reason, then this is something that we need to deal with, because the voucher program has been siphoning money away from our public schools since it started in 1990.
Okay.
Well, I want to know how, Julie, what would you tell people about why you're the first call when it comes to why you're the obvious first call for anyone looking to fix Wisconsin's public schools?
Well, because I am a public school advocate. And I've been in lots of different positions in the state of Wisconsin in public education. So in 1990, I was interim general counsel for the Department of Public Instruction when the voucher program started. And I've also been a professor at UW-Madison in the law school and in the School of Education. I left for 10 years and went to DC, and then came back to be dean of the School of Education. And, I take okay, so many of your listeners are probably from Minnesota and Illinois, but in Wisconsin, we have something that we call the Wisconsin idea, which the idea is, it's not the only idea we have in Wisconsin, but it's a damn good idea. And that is that the university should be useful. So I've always taken that to heart and made sure that from my university position as professor or dean, I've worked with the public schools and I've worked with the state of Madison to help to make things better for kids through education. And I've done it in lots of different ways. And I guess I'm kind of a fellow rabble rouser.
Which we need more of. And I'm so grateful that, of course, Kirk will bring more rabble rousers. Who else do we have completing this team of experts today, Kirk?
So this is where it's wild, because, I set out to find the best legal team I could, and I had to raise money for that. Even to hire a legal team, I had to first understand I had to hire somebody to plan our strategy. And so, believe it or not, I grew up in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. There's only 2 other kids who went to Harvard from Central Wisconsin that I know, and probably in the history of Central Wisconsin, I don't know, but one of them is named Tim Clinton, who was from Athens, Wisconsin, which, by the way, Fred is from Wausau, and so it's like a weird Central Wisconsin thing here, and I'll introduce Fred in a second, but I called up Tim, who I really respect. He's a renowned lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I know that he cares a lot about Wisconsin. He grew up here. I was like, Tim, I need your help. I got to find just the best lawyer I can find on voucher schools, that in the country. And he's like, well, obviously, it's got to be a guy named Greg Lipper. And Greg Lipper worked with Tim a long time, and so he said there's no other guy that you want to hire that's better on this one subject than Greg Lipper. And so I'm going to introduce Fred in a second, but I wanted to introduce Greg, who is my first hire, who helped devise the strategy for what we were going to do on this lawsuit. So Greg, take it away, my friend.
Hello. My name's Greg Lipper. I work at a giant-sized 2-person law firm in Washington, D.C. named Legrand Law. So it's a woman named Rebecca Legrand and I are in practice together. I have a pretty diverse practice. I do criminal defense. I do First Amendment law. I do appellate practice. And then I do some, different types of civil litigation. But I also earlier in my career was at a civil liberties firm, and at that firm actually litigated several different school voucher cases, and then after I left that organization, I in private practice have filed briefs in certain voucher cases. So I have done a lot of voucher cases. I'm kind of generally a constitutional law and a nerd, and but also just a day-to-day litigator. And I don't know that I'd say I devised the strategy, but I guess quarterbacked it in consulting with Professor Underwood and lots of other people who have, you know, a lot more experience dealing with the Wisconsin voucher program and Wisconsin state law. So, but yeah, it's been interesting to look at these issues again. And I mean, the thing that really becomes clear, very much so, and in this program in particular, is that from the start, even from the so-called like quote experimental program that started in Milwaukee in 1990, is that the brains behind school vouchers in Wisconsin from the start have had the long-term goal of dismantling public education in Wisconsin and elsewhere. And you can see as the voucher program has been built brick by brick and brick, and as it continues to expand, and as different requirements and prerequisites are taken away, as the voucher program gets more and more money, and as public schools get less and less, you can sort of see their long-term strategy coming into effect. Like, I'll give them credit. They really played the long game here. They didn't go whole hog in 1990. They really took their time, and, you know, they were able to persuade the state Supreme Court several times. They're like, look, it's just an experiment. It's very narrow. It's, you know, very, and like, it is now poised to become just a, you know, an 800-pound, you know, gorilla, or a, you know, the elephant in the state, or pick your metaphor. But yeah, I mean, it is really sort of more and more day by day, year by year, succeeding in its goal of trying to dismantle public education. And it is not, the voucher program is not actually serving Wisconsin's children and their families. It is serving voucher schools and supporters of school vouchers. And that is a problem when, under the Wisconsin Constitution, the state is supposed to provide public institutions and public schools.
By the way, as a fellow nerd, not just about issues like this, but also I've taken my family to Cardiff. I have to see where a lot of Doctor Who is filmed. By the way, I love it. That's just for our friends who can watch.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Greg, I want to ask you, why are you so passionate in fighting this fight against school vouchers?
You know, it's, well, you know, part of it is I get outraged by like every, you know, it's like I get outraged by everything, you know, but no, but I mean, it's, I think what is so insidious, and I'm certainly not the only person to have made this point, you know, but what's so insidious about school voucher programs is that they take like that it sort of like it feigns concern for people who are struggling, you know, for any number of reasons, you know, in public schools, or who are struggling, and it uses that feigned concern to create a system that's going to just exacerbate those problems, right? And so, you know, it's hard, you know, you start to say, oh, school choice, who could be opposed to school choice? How, you know, we're just helping failing schools. But if you see it as like this march of like, to create this kind of death spiral where every additional voucher student means that the public schools get less money and have fewer resources to do their job, which leads more people to voucher schools, which takes more money away from public schools, which starts to unravel the whole system. And then you think like, because we've seen this in all other areas, who do you think is going to benefit and who do you think is going to suffer when education is just another private good, right? It ain't going to be like disadvantaged students or people without a lot of resources. It's going to be, you know, there's going to be certain people that can afford to, you know, go to very, very fancy selective private schools, and then everyone else is going to, you know, fight over the scraps. And we've seen this happen in, you know, industry after industry and healthcare and other things. And it's like, you know, the one thing I have never said to myself as a student was, boy, I wish the, you know, public education system was like, felt more like the American healthcare system, right? But that's kind of that's the end game here. And what's so cynical about it is that it uses, you know, feigned concern for certain students who are struggling. And rather than saying, oh yeah, our public schools are important, but, you know, let's look at how we can make our public schools better. Instead, it's, oh, well, our public schools aren't perfect. That's the excuse we need to dismantle them entirely, right? And so that's kind of why I, you know, get fired up. One of the reasons I get kind of fired up about.
So Thanks, Greg. And as everybody can hear, on the audience can hear, this is the reason we hired this guy. I mean, he cares deeply about this. And can you see this guy in front of a jury, like convincing people? I can, and I think it's going to be great when he's ultimately
Kirk
doing that.
Bangstad is not guilty, ladies and gentlemen. It was someone else.
All right. So we've ignored another person in the Brady Bunch Zoom here for too long, and Fred Milms is Brian Potts is not here tonight. He's a partner at Perkins Coie, which is a national law firm. It lives in Madison, and he couldn't be here tonight, and he's part of the team. But Fred Milms is one of the most, like, he's a good friend of mine. He's been with me through many of these Minocqua Brewing Company kind of endeavors to try to fix Wisconsin. The first one was when we tried to do a class action lawsuit against all the nut job school boards that were trying to dismantle mask mandates and get everybody sick in public schools throughout Wisconsin. So Fred helped me with that lawsuit. By the time it unraveled is a federal lawsuit as well. By the time it unraveled, we had a vaccine, so it didn't really like get anywhere. But man, we tried. We shot for the moon on that one, and I know that Fred is willing to. He's willing to, ride with me into things that are important and potentially very hard, and he's full of courage. And so Fred's from Wausau. He's from Central Wisconsin. Fred, can I ask you a question? Can you tell me why this is important to you, why this voucher suit is important to you, and why you're happy to be on the team? Or if you're not happy to be on the team, you can't say that right now.
Fair enough. Well, then I'm happy to be on the team. I don't, after Greg gave his answer, I don't know if I can give a better one, but I will do my best. I think just having, the important part to me sort of is more, well, it is important statewide. I guess I've spent a lot of my life in Milwaukee. Well, I might have grown up in Wausau. I went to undergrad at the University of Milwaukee. After I left law school, I lived in Milwaukee for a while. When I was an undergrad, I worked as an EMT in Milwaukee in some of the most distressed neighborhoods, and really the hardest economically, hit parts of Milwaukee that have been really decimated by some of our state policies. And I think in doing that, I developed a very sort of aggressive sort of protectionism over the entire city. And I think that's a big part of this for me, because while the school voucher system is causing problems across the state, it's causing problems in our scene, it's truly decimated MPS, where MPS is losing hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. Their staffing ratios have been destroyed. They're having to deal with a significantly larger number of sort of a higher percentage of disabled students, because the voucher schools don't take disabled students with the same sort of funding, which throws those ratios off and really kind of hurts their ability to provide services to everyone. So I think my interest in this, as much as I'm from northern Wisconsin or central Wisconsin, is that I am incredibly protective of Milwaukee, and I always will be, because it's sort of my second home.
I love that. I love that you have the sense of protection for your community, and I am also grateful that you mentioned the how much vouchers affect the disabled community. I have a son who's severely disabled, and I have friends who have wanted to send their kids to charter schools, in Chicago, and they weed them out too. If they're not just kids with disabilities, but kids who have behavioral issues, kids who don't perform as well. So there's a lot of components to this. We are going to take a break. This is exciting. I love meeting the team. I love meeting the warriors and the champions in this battle. We are talking about the Republican war on education in Wisconsin. Kirk Bangstad is our flamethrower. That's what I call you on my show, by the way. We need more flamethrowers on our side. That's all they have. Exactly. We will return with our guests. This segment is sponsored by Minocqua Brewing Company. You can go to the Patti Vasquez show page, pin there right at the top. You can find out where you can pick up a progressive brew or a choice seltzer or now the Schoolhouse Bock, which we love. So much going on. We'll be right back after this on WCPT 820 AM, 950 AM, Minneapolis, St. Paul. More on the Heartland Signal.
Inaugural Brewing Company is excited to partner with Equality Vines to create Choice Wine. Choice Wine comes in two choices, Rosé and Sauvignon Blanc. This wine was created to support women's reproductive rights after the Supreme Court rolled back Roe v. Wade in 2022 and caused chaos all over the country. For our Up North podcast listeners, go to choice.equalityvines.com and be sure to use the promo code UPNORTH to get 10% off your next order. That's choice.equalityvines.com and use the promo code UPNORTH.
Let me die.
And now back to the right-wing war on education.
Yes, and educate responsibly. We are taking on the Republicans' war on education. And joining us, of course, heading this fight is Kirk Bangstad and his team of public education warriors. We are going to be talking over the next several months about this war on education. And a lot of the false lies you're going to hear out there. We're going to talk about how there's a teacher turnover rates. We're going to talk about special education, which we just mentioned a few moments ago. We're going to talk about the parasitic voucher system that Republicans are trying to ram down so many general assemblies across the country. Kirk, take it away.
So, like you said, this is a long conversation that we have to have because there's so many things going on with public schools, not only in Wisconsin but around the country. The Republicans are trying to dismantle them. The first show that I thought we should have, though, is we're going to file a lawsuit within a few weeks to sue in Wisconsin to overturn the private school voucher system. This voucher system exists in many other states. But I think that it's oldest, and I think it began in Wisconsin, and so it took a long time to get this group together and to do the research. Julie has it all in her head, but we had to get a few more people. She had to give some of her immense knowledge to a few of the other folks on the team, and so I wanted to, in this segment, give the floor to both Greg. We'll start with you, Greg, and we'll talk to Professor Underwood soon. Through your research this summer, why do you think we'll be able to actually do this after 30 years of not being able to in Wisconsin?
So, as a lawyer, I should start off by saying, we're still obviously finalizing, exactly what our claims are going to be and exactly who will be representing, in the lawsuit, but I think there are, a couple of serious problems with the voucher program under the state constitution that either have never been addressed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court or that were addressed under very different circumstances, that have changed considerably since then. The first is just the requirement, a longstanding requirement that public funds must, under the state constitution, public funds must be used for public purposes. You're going to, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's no taxation without representation, which is, it's always a sore spot for someone like me who lives in Washington, D.C. But it's, it's a variant on that, which is if you're going to take taxpayers' money, which is, can be very important for a lot of things, you should be using it for public purposes and not for private purposes. And here, the system of education that more and more and more tax dollars are being used to fund through voucher schools does not resemble in its sort of basic characteristics the system of public education that the state provides. And so, we can talk about a couple of things, but the first thing, and Fred was kind of talking about this when he was talking about the sort of firsthand how he's seen what school vouchers have done to his own, community's public schools, which is that every time someone elects to participate and use one of these vouchers to attend a voucher school, a corresponding, a significant amount of money is being taken away from that public school district. And over time, so basically, literally the state is raiding the public schools in order to pay for voucher schools. And the people that are left behind in the public schools have fewer resources available. Their education is being backed by fewer resources. So that's kind of the big thing. And over time, this adds up, and it adds up in weird ways because, for instance, if I live in one school district, I can go to a voucher school in another school district. So, my school district is losing that money, and that money is going to an entirely different school district. There's all sorts of things, but it's sort of, and we've seen this just at a very macro level. We have seen year after year, the school vouchers budget is getting larger and larger and larger and larger, whereas public schools funding had best been stagnant, and at worst, actually declining, especially when you take education into account. And so far from advancing a public purpose in providing education, it is affirmatively worsening public education. And then there are several characteristics, and we won't have time to go into all of them, but sort of other factors that really sort of show this is voucher schools are not anything that resembles public education in any sense of the word. One of the big things is just in terms of standards and accountability, right? The public schools have all sorts of metrics and testing and this and that, and and real accountability. The voucher schools have little to none of that, right? And so just the basic, you might think as a taxpayer, it'd be how well are the schools performing that all of my tax dollars are going to? The answer is your guess is as good as mine, right? Because we just don't have that basic accountability. I mean, even it seems like they finally relented, but I mean, even when there was a proposal to just require similar basic public disclosure of how the money is being spent, supporters of voucher schools were howling. They're no, it's really important that public schools disclose this information, and it would be a atrocity if voucher schools had to disclose this information. It seems like they finally relented, but it kind of it shows you, it's very revealing because it shows you the fundamental character is different. One final thing I'll just mention, and like I said, there are many others, and I think a couple of people I think we're talking about this during the break, which is educating students with disabilities. Every public school has a long list of requirements under both federal and state law to not only nominally provide an education to students with disabilities, but to make sure they're actually getting a real education. So accommodations, having parents involved, tailoring the education program, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And basically none of those apply to voucher schools. So even if a student with disabilities is accepted into a voucher school, they can be left far, they can be allowed to fall behind. They can be kicked out for, disciplinary issues that are clearly a result of the disability and that should be dealt with resources, all of these things. So those are just a couple of the many instances in which these schools do not resemble in any basic sense of the word public schools, and thus the taxpayer money that's being used to fund them is not advancing a public purpose as the Constitution requires. There's a whole second constitutional claim that both to allow you to hear someone else's voice, and also because Professor Underwood, I think, has been working with these issues for way longer than I have. I think she may be the one to discuss it. So I will at least give her the option or tee it up for her, unless she doesn't want to, and then I'll continue on it. But
yes, Professor Underwood, let us know what other aspects you want to make sure that we are aware of. Your microphone, sorry. That. Yeah.
Sorry. There are so many different things that are a problem with the voucher schools, the lack of accountability, and certainly the fact that they can choose. They choose the students they want. It's not that parents really can choose a school. The schools get to choose the students. And so students with disabilities, students with behavior issues, students who have additional needs, whether they're English language learning needs, or are different in any way or need additional services, the voucher schools don't have to take them. And in fact, many schools actually actively kind of counsel them out. But also there are some other legal theories that we've been looking at that are more taxpayer related. There's there's an older case in the state of Wisconsin. It's a school finance case, and I won't even go into school finance case because that will send everybody screaming from the room. And some people might be driving. We wouldn't want to do that to them, or they might fall asleep while they're driving. That would be horrible. But there is an old case, a 1976 case that says that the state can't make local school districts send money from their own coffers to other school districts. And basically the way this voucher program is structured, the money gets swept off the top, money gets sent from one side of the state to the other, so that there are lots of districts in the state, because of the statewide voucher program, who send no kids to voucher schools. They probably don't even have private schools in their district, right? But they are stuck with the tab. And from a taxpayer perspective, that seems unfair as well.
Repeat that. So can you just explain that a little bit more? Using like cities in Wisconsin, maybe have to shovel their tax dollars to Milwaukee, I'm guessing, or Racine. Can you kind of paint that picture even with more detail?
We were talking about that earlier, and I'm going to actually, Fred, do you remember the names and numbers that we were talking about earlier today?
There are a few off the top of my head. Altoona is sending about 150,000 out. Black River Falls was spending 115-ish thousand out without having any voucher students. And Abbotsford was about 70,000. Just off the top of my head, those are the three I recall, yeah. But I think there are about 160 districts that are.
Altoona is like Eau Claire, Abbotsford's like Wausau, and all going to different parts of the state. It's crazy.
But just think about that. So these little school districts, because these are, Altoona's not a big school district, right? They are sending money out the door before they ever can then hire a single teacher. They're sending money out the door of their school funds to pay for vouchers that may be, anywhere in the state that are the voucher program writ large across the state. These programs are wrong for teachers. They're wrong for educators. They're wrong for private schools. They're wrong for communities, and they're wrong for taxpayers.
Yeah, and just to connect the dots, or kind of just reinforce what Professor Underwood and Fred were saying. So, if my school district is like, okay, we were going to spend X, we decided that our public schools need X dollars this year, but then our aid gets reduced because a bunch of kids are going to voucher schools in different districts, and so our state aid gets reduced by an amount. Now it's like, well, okay, we still need to spend X on public schools, and so the only way for us to do that is to raise our own property taxes to make up the difference, right? And so there's a real a direct effect on not just the schools, but pass through, like a direct effect on the pocketbooks of people from that district, because unless you were willing to say, okay, we're content to leave our public schools so sort of without the resources they need, we've got to raise our local taxes because that's the only way we're going to make up the shortfall. So it's a real it really is like a pocketbook effect in addition to an education effect.
I can't believe that there are communities that are paying for these voucher programs without having a single student involved in the programs. Are there, do small towns have to pay for big city voucher programs? Does anyone want to?
That's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. There are some big city programs. There's the Milwaukee program. There's the Racine program, and to fund part of that, the state takes the money out of the whole education pot, which makes the pot smaller, and that money gets taken from small towns all across the state of Wisconsin to fund those programs.
And it's not like that money's even helping like the Milwaukee Public School District, right? It's helping, vouchers, it's and so that's the thing. It's helping voucher. Yeah, it's helping voucher schools that happen to be located there, right? So it's not even So I think it's sort of.
So Fred, grew up in Wausau. I grew up in Stevens Point. We're like 45 minutes away. Like, I always felt a little bit like a second-class citizen in Wisconsin because I'm not from Madison or I'm not from Milwaukee. And it just appalls me that, to think that, my parents or my tax dollars are funding potentially some dude who opened up a school in a strip mall in Milwaukee just to get rich, and somehow or just to soak our tax dollars and get rich, and somehow people who live in these smaller towns, the opportunity for us to make riches are limited because we're in Stevens Point and Wausau, and we have to get the poorer people living in smaller towns have to fund the richer folks who are opening schools just to take advantage of this unequal system. It seems appalling.
Yeah, and to build on that, you may think it's like, oh, that's far-fetched that some dude's just gonna like open a fake school in a mall to get rich. But there is, again, these programs are 30 plus. Yeah, I keep joking that these programs are now like old enough to like, drink alcohol and rent a car and run for Senate and whatnot, but these are like 30 plus year programs, 30 plus year old programs. There's now data. So since the Wisconsin voucher programs have began, so 41%, so more than 4 in 10 voucher schools that originally participated in the program, not just have dropped out of the program, but have actually closed. And there's even a term that's emerged, because this is so common, something called pop-up schools, which they open to take advantage of vouchers, and then they shut down after an average of only about 4 years. So like, this is a real thing, right? It is unfortunately a program like this is sort of like can be, and I don't want to say all, there are certainly many schools that are sort of at least acting in good faith, but there are also many others who are sort of, a magnet for grifters, unfortunately. And we're seeing this borne out, like not just with a couple of anecdotes, but actually with sort of like systematic data.
I have a question. We talked about a magnet for grifters, and I get that. You can just be some random guy who rents out a little space in a strip mall. But I mean, and I haven't prepped you all for this question, but it just seems obvious. I mean, Betsy DeVos was appointed by Trump to be, our like education secretary. And all I've ever heard about her is that she's like the leader of voucher schools and stuff. I mean, Greg, do you know, or Julie, do you know? Actually, I mean, I guess Julie, this question is for you. Do you know the relationship between, these 1% billionaire Betsy DeVos types and voucher programs?
Well, I do know that the programs originally started to destroy public schools, and it was all started, in that ALEC kind of bubble of wealthy individuals and corporations that were intent on making money from public policy. And their intent, as you said before, their intent really was to dismantle public schools. The whole idea is to get a voucher in every backpack, because then we won't need school boards, we won't need school districts. It'll all be entirely done by the corporate process. And the lots and lots of big donors who are the K-12 inks of the United States, who have contributed to this and made it happen. So there is a direct line. Yeah.
And I mean, like Professor Underwood mentioned ALEC, who I think probably most of the listeners and viewers know is the sort of the infamous American Legislative Exchange Council. And the Governor Thompson, who was governor at the time the first voucher program started here, was sort of very much a disciple of ALEC. And the Milwaukee program borrowed heavily from the language used in the ALEC model school vouchers legislation. And then, so this is like, this is kind of there's a real connection. Like, this was not a sort of grassroots Milwaukee thing. This is a sort of ALEC and similar groups, including similar groups based in Wisconsin, that kind of use this as a stalking horse.
So I do want to talk about what we're going to talk about going forward, with the conversations that we plan on having over the next several months as we continue to build this defense of public education, because if Republicans are waging a war, we have to defend it. So, what are some of the things that you want to discuss? The idea again, we've talked about the false notion of school choice. You know, the whole narrative that, well, you know, I guess Kirk's been attacked with, oh, I guess you don't like kids of color because you don't want them to have a choice or access to opportunity. And Fred, you mentioned that that's something that you're passionate about with communities that have been choked off from opportunities. Let's talk a little bit about the conversations that we're going to have in the next few months, some of the topics and why. Julie, do you want to talk about some of the issues or
Actually, let me take it before Julie talks. So this is kind of my thoughts. We're going to be suing, right? And we're going to be trying to overturn what we think is bad for Wisconsin and for kids. But for so long, we've been told through the news that this thing called school choice is very good for kids. And so, you know, if in school choice obviously means you can get a voucher school and you can go to a private school. And we've just talked about why that's bad. So, but school choice makes people think, well, yeah, well, I should have a choice in where to send my kids. I want to have that right. That's a right that I should have, you know? So, if we're going to be suing, to me, it's not enough just to sue and overturn a policy that a lot of people have been convinced is good when it actually is not good. And so the reason we're doing these shows with you, Patti, because you're a superstar in the talk show world, and so people listen to you. And so I wanted to get this out, not just in Wisconsin, but in Chicago and Minneapolis and around the country, hopefully, eventually, because we have to be able to talk about why these things are bad, not just sue and overturn them, because we don't want there to be a fallout. We don't want people to. Like I said, I've been being called racist because I'm trying to lead this charge to get rid of the voucher program, and they're being able to say that in a way that's absolutely wrong. And so that's why it's important to me to talk about this as well as sue. So Julie, what are we going to be talking about, the different ways that we're going to be going at this conversation?
Well, we're going to start off with Professor Julie Mead from the University of Wisconsin-Madison as well. And she is a leader in thinking about school choice and why this really isn't a choice at all. She also does a lot of work in disability rights and why these vouchers violate or discriminate against students with disabilities and students of other types that are frequently discriminated against, like the LGBTQ community as well. But she knows the history of vouchers in the state of Wisconsin. So we're going to be talking to her. And then after that, we're going to turn to a national perspective, Jessica Levine, who is the litigation director for a national group called Public Funds for Public Schools. Because I think it's important on a regional kind of program that we look at all of the other states that are in this same position, because we hope to set a path for them so that we can all get out of this terrible position. But it's also nice to know that we aren't in it alone. So she's got a national perspective to help us think about that. We want to talk about the urban schools, Milwaukee and Racine. So we'll hear from people from Milwaukee and from Racine, and some people who are in the schools and some families in Milwaukee and Racine, and actually see how these programs have actually, how they've actually not just damaged their schools, but damaged their communities, as Fred spoke about. But we also will look at rural schools. And that same kind of idea of like, how has this had an impact on rural schools? We'll focus on the disability community as well. And just think about this in various segments, because as Kirk says, we want to set the record straight. We want people to understand that school choice, the co-opting language, when we use choice in terms of reproductive rights, some people think that's bad, but when they use it for schools, it's a different thing. And in this situation, the only choice really is the choice of the schools. And all we're doing is, for many, many people, particularly in our statewide program, is changing who pays the tuition from the parents paying tuition to the state paying tuition. People don't really understand that, and we want to set the record straight. So we're going to go on a little journey here and think about let me count the ways, all of this, that this is really messed up public policy. Technical term, messed up public policy.
Nice.
It's going to be a wild ride. Yeah, go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah, so I'm excited for this because you know, how often do you get a chance to talk about one topic? I mean, Patti, I hope we don't bore your listeners, but there's so much to this.
No. Like, we're getting texts. We're getting messages on your Facebook page and on our text screen. People are really grateful for
because the economics, and you didn't mention that, Julie, but we're going to spend an entire hour on the economics of this stuff, because just understanding how your property tax dollars goes through this roller coaster of being siphoned away into another area it's mystifying, and it grosses you out when you actually like understand what's happening. And so that's something we're really going to focus on as well.
I think it's incredibly necessary. And by the way, I do want to thank you guys. I know I mentioned this earlier. I have a son who has a disability, and as someone who has sat through 15 IEP meetings, working on his individualized education plan, it is mind-boggling to me that people, say, well, what about, you don't care about kids having a choice. And, for parents who are already in a state of emergency from the moment we have a diagnosis, and then to be put even in more challenging positions by the threat of voucher school programs, I really am grateful for all the hard work you're doing, because you're holding the line. Just because Illinois is in a good position today doesn't mean that would be the case tomorrow should things change.
Yeah, and it's cagey. I've worked on I've written briefs in other voucher cases involving the disability issue, and I mean, there's instances where basically a family, a voucher school misleads a family about exactly what services they'll provide for a student with disability, and then that turns out those aren't available, and those are years. Those are critical years for the kid that you're not getting those back, right? So it's extremely concerning.
By the way, also I want to mention, thank you for that. I also want to thank Kirk for the new tap room. One of our listeners says they're excited about the new tap room in Madison. Of course, these segments, the Republicans' War on Public Education, sponsored by Inaugural Brewing Company, and we'll have to have a big sit down in Madison soon. We're very excited.
Well, I haven't invited Julie, Greg, and Fred, but every time I do a radio show, obviously we gotta have some beer to loosen up the, shake some of the cobwebs out of the beer, of the brain, so that we can be more lucid and make sure that we don't miss any of the important topics.
Cheers. Julie, for anyone who, or any of our guests, before we sign off here today and end our inaugural show, do you have some websites or resources where people can find out more information so that they can be proactive in this?
Julie? Sure. There's the Wisconsin Public Education Network. WisconsinNetwork.org has an entire voucher website, voucher transparency website that has lots of information, lots of great graphics as well, if you want to tell the story in your own community. So I'd urge you to go to WisconsinNetwork.org to look at that kind of information.
Fred, I feel like I didn't talk to you enough today. Fred, did you have anything you want to say before we sign off, or any resources you want to share?
Fred shaved today just for this show, by the way. Just
I did. And no, I think Greg and Julie covered everything. Certainly, probably better than I would have. So I think it was okay. I was a little silent here. These two are the true experts.
Well, thank you so much. I don't know if I push past my time on WCPT. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. We're still live for a few moments. Greg, did you want to share any resources?
Nope. I think the ones that were mentioned cover it. And yep. And then once we start filing things, then we can direct people to the case we've made and the case we're making in court.
Outstanding. Thank you, everyone, so much. Kirk, any final words? I think we've said a lot today, and there's so much work to do. So many great conversations ahead of us.
Buckle up, Patti. Buckle up.
I gotta get some of that Schoolhouse Bach. I need some of that Schoolhouse Bach for the next show. Everyone. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Underwood. Thank you, Greg and Fred, Kirk, everyone. It was a great. Thank you for all the great comments. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Join us next Thursday, 6 p.m. Central, for the Republicans' War on Education and what we're going to do to fight it, because these guys ain't messing around. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
You're listening to the Right Wing War on Education, brought to you by the Minocqua Brewing Company.